Welcome to my podcast. Today I will be the Armchair GM for the New York Islanders and the New York Rangers. I will start by being the Armchair GM for the New York Islanders, then I will be the Armchair GM for the New York Rangers. After another second round exit for the Islanders, there will be a lot of question marks surrounding the core pieces of the roster for the New York Islanders. There are a few key players they need to re-sign. There is also a goaltending controversy up in the air on Long Island, so it will be interesting to see what the Islanders decide to do this offseason. Here's what I would do if I were the GM of the Islanders. But first, let's take a look at who the free agents are. The key UFAs are Kyle Okposo, Frans Nielsen, Matt Martin, Martin-Cizikas-Clutterbuck, and John-Francois Berube. Steve Barney. The RFAs are Casey Cizikas, Shane Prince, Alan Quine, Brian Strome, and John-Francois Berube. Both Kyle Okposo and Frans Nielsen are going to be the top of the crop free agents this season, which means they can only afford to bring back one of them. As good as Kyle Okposo is for the New York Islanders, he is going to get overpaid in free agency. So it may be a smart idea to let Kyle Okposo walk in free agency. But I would try to re-sign Frans Nielsen for the reason being he plays in all situations. He's a leader in the locker room. And he is a guy that Jack Capuano relies on heavily for stability. So for that reason, I can see the Islanders definitely bringing back Frans Nielsen. Frans Nielsen should get a contract along the lines of 4 years, $5 million, because he's a good two-way center, used in all situations, and a good leader, like I said before. Next, I would re-sign Matt Martin and Casey Cizikas to 2-year deals. You have to bring back these two players because you have to reform that fourth line. It's not even a fourth line anymore. It's more their second line. That's how they were used in the playoffs. You have to bring those players back because they are an important part of the New York Islanders. I would bring back Martin at $1.5 million and Cizikas at $2 million. Next, you re-up Alan Quine and Shane Prince to 2-year deals, and Berube to a 1-year deal and a 2-way contract. Next, I'll have to make some trades. I would send one trade, Yaroslav Halak, Anders Lee, and Ryan Strome, as well as the 3rd-round pick in 2017, to the Dallas Stars in exchange for Valeri Nichushkin, Matthias Janmark, and Antti Niemi. This works for both teams because the Dallas Stars want a proven playoff performer, and Halak is that. Niemi would be a replacement for Halak, and he would tandem with Greiss. Nishuskin and Strome are essentially going to be flipped for each other, and they would have a change in scenery because Nishuskin hasn't fit in Dallas exactly, and Strome hasn't fit with the Islanders, so it's a perfect swap. As for Janmark and Lee, it works for the Islanders because the Islanders need some speed, and Anders Lee gives the Dallas Stars some size up front. After all is said and done, the New York Islanders would have added Antti Niemi, Matthias Janmark, and Valeri Nichushkin. The New York Islanders would have lost Kyle Oposo, Jaroslav Halak, Anders Lee, Ryan Strome, Marius Ilishki, and Steve Bernier. This is how the roster will look after all said and done. The first line would be Mattias Janmark, John Tavares, and Josh Bailey. The second line will be Brock Nelson, Franz Nelson, and Valeri Nichushkin. The third line will be Shane Prince, Mikhail Grabovski, and Kulimen. The fourth line will be Martin-Cizikas and Clutterbuck. The first defensive pair will be Nick Leddy and Travis Hamonic. The second defensive pair will be Calvin DeHaan and Johnny-Boychuk. The third defensive pair will be Thomas Hickey and Reinhart-L Schenn. The goaltenders will be Niemi and Thomas Greiss. They will be working as a tandem. And now for the New York Rangers. The New York Rangers are in a great deal of trouble. They are an aging group of, the New York Rangers have a group of core players that are aging, but they don't have a lot of cap to re-sign their young players either. So this season needs to have a major shakeup in the Big Apple, especially coming off a disappointing first-round exit. A major shakeup of the roster is due, like I said before. This is what I would do if I were the Rangers GM. But first, let's take a look at the free agents. The UFAs are Eric Staal, Keith Yandel, Dan Boyle, Victor Stahlberg, and Dominic Moore. The key RFAs are Chris Kreider, Kevin Hayes, JT Miller, and Dylan McIlrath. The first move I would make as the Rangers GM would be trading Rick Nash. Rick Nash is a shell of himself, but he can still be a very productive player if he's playing somewhere else. He just, for some reason, isn't fitting in with the Rangers anymore. So you have to still trade him while he has value and has good years left in him. So now is still the perfect time to trade him. I would trade Rick Nash to the Ottawa Senators in exchange for Mike Hoffman and a conditional second-round pick in 2017 if the Senators make the playoffs. Mike Hoffman is an RFA this season, which means you have to re-sign him to a long-term contract. A 5-year deal worth around $5 to $6 million per season is a fair value contract for Mike Hoffman. This is a tough trade to make for the Rangers, but in order to make cap space to re-sign Chris Kreider and JT Miller, you should trade Dan Girardi to the New York Islanders in exchange for Griffin Reinhart and a second-round pick in 2016. The reason why you want to do this is because Dan Girardi is making, $5.5 million next season. And he isn't exactly worth that contract, so he's a bit overpaid. And Oilers are in desperate need of a physical stay-home defenseman. And Dan Girardi would definitely help their defense. Griffin Reinhart has some potential. He just needs the right system to develop in. Next, now you have some cap space, So you should re-sign JT Miller to a 2-year deal with $2.5 million, and Chris Kreider to a 5-year deal worth $4 million per season. Also re-sign Kevin Hayes to a 2-year deal with $1.75 million. You should bring back Viktor Staal-Klein and McIlrath to a 1-year deal. Also in free agency, they should go out and sign Luke Schenn to a 1-year deal and Steve Ott to a 1-year deal. This would help out the depth. So after all is said and done, the Rangers would have added Luke Schenn, Steve Ott, Griffin Reinhart, and Mike Hoffman. They would have lost Rick Nash, Dan Girardi, Keith Yandel, Dan Boyle, Dominic Moore, and Eric Staal. This is how the Rangers roster would look after all the moves. The first line would be Chris Kreider, Derek Stepan, and Matt Zuccarello. The second line would be Mike Hoffman, Derek Brassard, and JT Miller. The third line would be Oscar Lindberg, Kevin Hayes, and Victor Fast. The fourth line would be Tanner Glass, Steve Ott, and Viktor Staal-Klein. The first defensive pair would be Ryan McDonagh and Braden Seeky. The second defensive pair would be Mark Staal and Kevin Klein. The third defensive pair would be Griffin Reinhart and Luke Schenn. Dylan McIlrath will be the seventh defenseman. Henrik Lundqvist and Antti Raanta would be the goalies. So that will wrap it up for this episode of Armchair GM of the New York Islanders and the New York Rangers. And we'll also wrap it up for this podcast. Next episode, I will be the Armchair GM for the Ottawa Senators and the Philadelphia Flyers.